in a, let's say, in Chesterfield, Missouri, which is a pretty affluent area here in the St. Louis metropolitan area, predominantly white, and saying one thing, and then going into North St. Louis, which is a poor area and predominantly black, and saying something else. Okay, that's flip-flopping. That's just trying to get votes. That's being disingenuous. The difference between that and listening to what somebody says, considering the alternative, maybe thinking, maybe he or she is right and I'm wrong, and then going with it. That's a big difference, okay? And through education is how people's minds are changed. And it's just not that their mind changed. Maybe the situation changed, okay? Maybe what they used to think was true or accurate or the best opinion, but then something else changed in the world that made it different, okay? Wow, it never used to be this way. This was never something we considered. 9/11 is a perfect example. Does anybody like showing their ID, taking off your shoes, going through the metal detector? Does anybody like that? Nobody likes that. But all but the most, most everybody agrees that it's necessary because 9/11 had never happened. We never in our wildest imaginations figured that something like that could happen. Well, it has. And as a society, we've decided we want to prevent it. By preventing it, you have to do this, this, and that. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. Things change. People change their minds. A lot of times based on how things changed around them, okay? But considering and discussing opposing viewpoints exercises the mind, okay? Listening and considering doesn't mean going with the crowd, and it's not flip-flopping. Education is how you learn. Now, most people listening to this podcast are older than 22 years old. So most of them are not in school. But education never stops. Okay? At least it shouldn't. Because consider when a living organism stops growing, it dies. That's how most living organisms work, okay? As the world changes, as we change the world, our viewpoints change as well. Okay? Now, what I'm going to do in today's podcast, I'm going to touch on 3 topics of discussion I participated in this past week. Now, I participated in more than 3 via social media, but I'm going to touch on these 3. And yes, it is true. Whilst enjoying my early morning coffee on the deck, watching the waves lap against the shore of Lake Michigan, I jousted with others on Facebook. Now, does that make me a bad person? No. Does that make me a boring person? Maybe. But I consider that I went for a long walk every day too, to exercise my body. But I had to exercise my mind as well. Discussion number 1. The headline is, America sucks and everybody is leaving. Here's the proof. And of course, I'm using poetic license on all this. This is not verbatim what the topic was about, not what the topic started with, okay? But when I read that, and when I see a statement that's so outrageous that I have to step in, that's when I step in. America sucks, everybody is leaving, and here's proof. Now, most people should know better, but someone who really should know better is the person who posted this, Charles Jaco. Yeah, that Charles Jaco. CNN Charles Jaco. KMOX Radio Charles Jaco. He had a television show here locally, Charles Jaco. He should know better, okay? Now, most read this story about how America sucks, everybody's leaving, more people are leaving than coming into this country. It's because America sucks and everybody hates us. And those who chimed in with him, yeah, Charles, yeah. It was just a bunch of how Trump's America was in free fall. We're no longer a great place to live, and people were leaving in droves. In fact, according to Jaco, more people were leaving the U.S. instead of entering it. Well, I reacted. I retorted. And I said, no, you people know this isn't true. More people are not leaving the United States than coming into this country. Okay. And those that agreed with him, they just piled it on and he let me have it with both barrels. Jaco even sent me an article to prove he was right. I read the article. And as usual, I researched it. I spent a lot of time researching it, a whole lot of time researching it. Now, the article wasn't fake news. And in fact, the article wasn't even incorrect. But these are not people who left the U.S. because they thought things sucked. In fact, these people left the U.S., but not permanently, and they kept their U.S. citizenship. These are people who left the U.S. because the biggest reason, they were pensioners. They're expats. They're pensioners who live in a cold climate during the winter, and they take their money and they move to the tropics, sometimes for good or for 12 months out of the year, sometimes for the wintertime. He considered that as people who are leaving the United States because we suck. No, they left the United States because they had a limited income. They didn't like Minnesota or Wisconsin or Massachusetts or one of these super cold places. And they moved to Mexico or Panama or Belize or Costa Rica or one of these places where the weather was a whole lot warmer and it was relatively safe and they could afford housing. So I guess it wasn't because the U.S. sucked, but it wasn't because our politics sucked or they used to suck worse than they do now or they suck more than they do now. It's because they lived in a part of the country that between October and March or April, the weather sucked. So they moved someplace where the weather was nicer, okay? That was one of the people who they thought hated the U.S. and had to leave. Many of them, they left the United States temporarily to care for old parents in the motherland. Now, these are U.S. citizens who were, they weren't born in this country. They immigrated from, in many cases, India. A lot of Indian U.S. citizenships who came from India, came to this country, became U.S. citizens. Now they're going back to India, at least temporarily, because their old parents need them. They're caring for their old parents in their last days on earth. Again, these people did not rebuke their citizenship. They're just living someplace temporarily. Many were people who married someone from another country, okay? Often planning to bring them back home, but they have to go through the whole legal system while they're over in that country. Businessmen and women, people working abroad. They work for a company and the company says, hey, we need for you to go ahead and work in Saudi Arabia for 6 months, okay, or a year or 2 years, and we'll pay you all kinds of money. These people say, I'm in, and they leave. Now, they're leaving because they can go someplace else and make more money. It's not because you can't earn a good living in the United States. It's just that for a number of years, they can earn a whole bunch of money working someplace else. They're going to bank that money, and they're coming back as well. Religious reasons. This is another reason why a lot of people leave the U.S. to live somewhere else. And again, they don't give up their citizenship. The biggest example, Israel. A lot of Jews who were U.S. citizens moved to Israel out of a commitment, obligation, whatever, to try to build Israel as the Jewish state. Okay? Evasion of legal liabilities. In other words, for some reason, you're going to jail here, so they leave. Okay, I guess you could say they think the United States sucks. They probably do, because the government wants to throw them in prison for breaking the law, so they run away. Okay? Now, almost none rebuked their U.S. citizenship. The point was made by Jaco and the others. Why there's more people than ever rebuking their U.S. citizenship, which, by the way, if you compare it to about 10 years ago, that's true. About 10, 15 years ago, hundreds of people, like 300 to 400 people a year, would rebuke their citizenship. Last year, actually 2 years ago, those are the newest stats I had, 3,000. Okay, that's a lot more, but it's 3,000 people. That's not a lot of people, okay? When I pointed this out, and I made all these points, look, here's what you said, but, the discussion stopped. And more importantly, the name calling stopped, okay? Maybe I convinced somebody. Maybe not. But this was a good discussion, and except for the hate Trump mantra that was going around, things were relatively civil. And by the way, I did point out truthfully that there are people in this country who say, I hate Trump and I'm leaving. Guess what? There's also people who said, I hate Obama and they left too. I hate Bush and I left. I hate Clinton and I go down the line. You're always going to have a handful of those knotheads who think, I hate the president, so I'm leaving this country. Those are few and far between, folks. But again, except for the hate Trump mantra, the conversation was relatively civil. So I consider that a win, a good conversation, a good exchange, a good exchanging of the minds, okay? Oh, and by the way, there are some 9 million U.S. citizens living abroad. That's something I didn't know. There's 9 million U.S. citizens living abroad. I didn't know there were that non-military U.S. citizens living abroad. And I learned that because I did the research. I read something. I thought there's no way this could be true. After researching it, there's kind of some truth to it, but... okay. But I now know there are some 9 million U.S. citizens living abroad. And now I know why they live abroad. So it was a win. I learned something. Hopefully the people from which I had an exchange learned something. Maybe Charles Jaco even learned something from your humble host. I'm going to invite him to be on the podcast. I think that'd be good. Former CNN guy on the James Strong Show podcast. If he accepts, I think would be a good show. We'll see. Discussion number 2. Earlier this week, or actually not last week because this is Sunday, billionaire, financier, right-wing politician backer David Koch died, okay? And the Gray Falcon posted a good article from the Wichita paper. The Kochs were from Wichita. And it was about the life of David Koch, an entrepreneur, businessman, right-wing political backer, okay? And it was a good article, okay? And I thanked him for posting it. But the majority of the responses were about how they were so glad that Koch was dead. Most of these posters were just saying, I'm glad he did. That's a good start. We need to kill him. They all need to be dead. In other words, I wish all who disagreed with me were dead. Again, I'm using poetic license here. That's not exactly what they said, but that was the inference. And I found these comments either inherently evil or originating from the mind of a very dim bulb. And to his credit, the Gray Falcon backed me up, okay? And what he mentioned, and he's absolutely true in saying this, is that this is not the left or just a bunch of one-way haters. It's that the left and the right, many on those sides, are a bunch of one-way haters. Because remember when Ruth Bader Ginsburg almost died several times? And many on the right were saying, yeah, I hope she dies. That way we can replace her with a good Supreme Court justice. What the hell, man? You hope she dies because you disagree with what she stands for? She's a Supreme Court justice, nominated or put into that place by a president and approved by Congress. You hope she dies because you don't agree with her? You hope this lady dies in the hopes that somebody who thinks more like you will be put into place? What, if somebody to the left of Ruth Bader Ginsburg gets put in place, you hope that they die soon too? What the hell? Okay? But it stopped. Maybe people just moved on. Again, after the Gray Falcon backed me up, after I made a statement, they jumped on me, and he backed me up with more facts.